Mm-hmm. If you want to call in, 347-215-7598. Let us know what was your score as it relates to Garcia Herrera. But before we get to the phone lines, everyone is asking on Twitter, what do we know about this ongoing rift between Oscar De La Hoya and Richard Schaefer? All I can tell you is this. From everything I've been told and all the intel that I've received, there's no doubt that there is absolutely some problems between the two. If this was a marriage, at the very least, they are sleeping in separate beds, if not a trial separation. Gabe, I didn't get to see it last week since I was at the fight. Did you notice at the Angulo-Canelo fight that not only were Oscar and Richard separated by Leonard Ellerby, of all people, I don't know if that's symbolic or not, but they were a couple feet apart, but they might as well have been 50 miles apart. They didn't even look in each other's directions, much less talk. I thought that body language was very, very telling between the two.
Oh, yeah, there's no question about it, that there's just something there. I mean, anybody you talk to, that's all anybody really wants to whisper about. Putting it in conjunction with all the Al Haymon signings,
yes,
it makes you start to wonder, what is that about? And what are they being told? You know, it was interesting when I talked to the Khan camp beforehand. I said, you know, was that part of any of the conversations that you had when you were first discussing the Floyd fight, was signing with Al Haymon? And they said no. But at the same time, I got the sense that they were like, you know, if you asked me, I would say yes. You know, they didn't say as much, but, you know, everybody seems to acknowledge that Al's the guy to be with. So here we are with bang, 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 all these signings that happen. The Petersons, Amir Khan, Robert Guerrero. Is Oscar going to get quiet and just go along with the program? What's going to happen? Will this all get dropped, do you think? Or is he going to proceed and be like, look, no, I don't want this guy running my company and doing really well with it? How well are they doing? That's a good question.
Gabe, one of the theories that's being thrown out there is that with Al Haymon, who I tweeted earlier, is getting more signatures in the Declaration of Independence recently, and he might be on the verge of signing Robert Guerrero. Now, as we talk about this at 4:18 p.m. Pacific time on Monday, that is not finalized from what I've been told, but it could certainly happen, is that he is lining himself up to basically have his own company, and then perhaps Richard Schaefer runs some sort of company that is a combination of Mayweather, TMT, and Haymon. Now, Haymon in the past has always dealt with the A side, but as you mentioned, he's signing everybody now, even retreads or guys who have had better days like Chad Dawson, and not just Lamont Peterson, also Anthony Peterson. So I don't think there's any doubt that what Haymon is doing, which is doing a clean sweep of all of boxing, and I don't want to say creating a monopoly, but certainly at least Walmarting his business now, something is in the works there. And I just thought it was very strange that neither Schaefer or De La Hoya were at the fight in Puerto Rico. And if you look at De La Hoya's Twitter feed, not only is his avatar now a Goldenboy logo, which his silhouette is actually the logo, now he's praising a top rank in HBO. HBO last year basically threw his company off the network publicly. And Bob Arum, he says in interviews on Boxing Scene to Louis Sandoval, I love that guy. Really? Some of those things just make you go, as Arsenio Hall once said, All right, and as for Golovkin-Chavez, I'm hearing that Tom Loeffler and Bob Arum, they're in constant discussions, and they feel pretty confident on July 12th at the Forum. But again, there's also rumors that Chavez is looking towards Al Haymon, of all people, and I'll let you conclude the rest. As for Mikey Garcia, Gabe, it's interesting. He went from perhaps fighting Yuri Gamboa and then getting backed up to June 21st to maybe nothing. And HBO's taking a hard line this year, and I don't know why. Maybe it's a decreased budget. But these guys nowadays, if they don't take the fights HBO wants, it seems to me they're just pulling the plug on guys and saying, get to the back of the line.
Yeah, it's an interesting situation with that. I mean, with having an Al involved with Chavez Jr., what's that going to look like? Will he be able to go back and forth between the networks? Is that a stopgap? Do you think it's a successful? Would it be a successful one for in the case of losing Canelo to Oscar De La Hoya Promotions? You know, or if they remain Goldenboy and Haymon goes on his own. To me, still the biggest question in all this is, will Al be able to go on his own? And does Oscar really want that? Those are two things. I mean, I don't really have the answers to it, but what would it look like? And could Al actually have his own company? Would it just be a guy that manages a bunch of fighters and he just jobs them out? But it seems like he likes more control than that.
And Gabe, another issue is as it relates to Richard Schaefer, Haymon, or Mayweather, I'm told no one has a promotional license as we speak right now. So just keep that in mind. Here's one from David Lee out of the UK. I think you can answer this better than I can, Gabe. Thoughts on the rumored Amir Khan-Louis collab?
One of those days where I'm just like, God, I'm just lounging, you know. But going back into the Goldenboy feud, the separation, it seems like everybody in that house are dividing. It's a civil war between everybody in the company, and they're lowering up. You know, we were talking about this off the air, and my question is it Oscar finally waking up like he did back in 1998, 99, where when he was about to step into the ring with Tito Trinidad, he finally realized and figured that he had a lot more money than was kind of being given to him, because starting off in his Golden Boy career, his father's friend who owned a car line, you know what, I didn't even look up the guy's name, keep forgetting to do that, but that guy was handling Oscar's career, and whenever Oscar needed money, he would go to Oscar would go to that guy, that gentleman, and the guy would, you know, tip him off a few thousand here, a few thousand there, and tell the entourage of Oscar De La Hoya, they started whispering in his ear and telling him, hey, dude, you know you got like over $1 million. Like, why are you only taking $1,200 or $1,500? Why is this guy telling you that you're broke? And going into that Tito Trinidad fight, he woke up and he started realizing his value. And we all know that Oscar's been fighting an addiction. He's been, you know, with this addiction for quite some time. He went to rehab. He was in MIA a few times, not really missing in action because we knew that he was in rehab, but we knew that he had this addiction. So my question is this really Oscar waking up, or is this his way of trying to control Oscar from using up all his money in this alcohol and drug addiction? That to me is the interesting question. I want to kind of lean and kind of believe that it's Oscar waking up and realizing that Schaefer, and this is only my opinion, people, is that Schaefer is a control freak. Schaefer needs to have complete control over every single thing. I don't know. He has that look. He just has that look. Now, I know you're supposed to not judge a book by its cover, but it's really hard not to judge that cover when you see it. My fans want to call in 347-215-7598. Go ahead, Gabriel.
Oh, you watch Richard. I've dealt with Richard over the years, and he's very much a control freak.
We both have.
Yeah, and it's, you know, just little whispers here and there of, you know, from the ring to everything. You know, I mean, there's a reason why Adrian Broner was like number 5 pound for pound. You know, Richard's even gone so far as to hire a particular writer over there. He doesn't, you know, he wants to control the media. He doesn't want, you know, he would tell me, you know, you need to write more positive stories. Like, what do you mean more positive stories? You know, always writing all this other stuff, you know, this looking up these deep stories or whatever, I forget how he described them. But it's like, you know, you need to write more positive things. And it's just like very strange. Like, what kind of promoter tells a journalist, like, what to write? Like, you do your job, dude, which is try to screw people over and sell us crap. I'll do my job, which is to point it out, you know? And it's stuff like that. I mean, you look at it, and you look at the direction the company's taken. Because if you recall, this was around my first band. So this is like 2 years ago. This is when Richard re-upped. He wasn't going to return, and then they offered him a big contract, and he re-signed. And now he's with, you know, I don't know how long the contract's for, but if you watch the trajectory of the company, not long after that, Oscar goes into his kind of first big deal for rehab. Kind of has his big scandals, and his scandals have really hurt his credibility in the industry. You know, I remember hearing people make jokes about, you know, the pictures that were released, and, you know, one promoter said, "How can I negotiate hardball with this guy sitting across the table, and all I can picture is those pictures?" And I'm not making a judgment one way or the other. I'm just saying the reality. Oscar damaged himself in the industry, and the more scandals, you know, the other one with the hookers trying to sue him, that was the most recent one, and just going into rehab and then coming out and talking about it so openly. I think you own things like that. In this day and age, it's going to get out anyway, so you might as well just own it and talk about it. But at the same time, it's hard to have the industry, such a macho industry on top of it, to have their respect. And I don't even know if Oscar's that good of a businessman. I think he's good at finding good businessmen to work with him. But in this case, you look at the way the company's gone, Oscar's like a pure afterthought. He wasn't at the Canelo fight with Mayweather. He went into rehab. It was like a huge week, and he just goes in. And we haven't really heard from him since, until now. You have to wonder what all that did for Richard. And did they go, you know what, we're just going to run the company the way we see fit? When did they stop asking him for permission for anything?
It's almost when I sit there and I start thinking about it, okay, and I think of Oscar throughout his whole career, we could pretty much say that it's been controlled from starting from his father all the way down to from Bob Arum to now with Richard Schaefer. I don't think this guy's ever been allowed to think. And with the problems that he's had with the hookers, the drugs, strip joints, and his alcohol, is you say that he's owned up to it. I think he's owned up to it to a certain point, but he hasn't been able to really own up to it completely where he hugs it because he's got the powers that be behind him to hide it, to make sure he doesn't get out of line, to make sure he doesn't trip and fall off of his words. I think that when you hit a certain age, Oscar's now in his 40s, I think that he's now getting that sense that I have no control of my life. I have no control of my financial. I have no control of what I do next. I want to now have control of it. I finally want to be able to walk without the training wheels there. I think that could be the stance of where he's at right now with Richard Schaefer, because Richard had the control of it. And I think you have a great point where when Oscar was gone for the Canelo fight, it was a huge fight. He had to go into rehab. I don't think that was entirely his decision. I think that was an executive decision to force him in there. And Richard was able to do what Richard's been wanting to do. And it's in his eyes. You can see there's that sparkle in his eyes that he wants that name. He needs that name. He wants to control that name. Excuse me. And Oscar is pretty much the Larry Flint that goes away because he's in the hospital or in rehab and then comes back to find that everything has been changed around, that he's not part of that chair. He's not part of those decisions. And the only way of taking control of it is by saying, hey, you're out. I'm the CEO. I'm the president. I am Goldenboy. You work for me. And two, Oscar's really good at finding businessmen. Is it really Oscar really good at finding businessmen, or is it businessmen really good finding Oscar?
That's a good question. That's a really good question. We'll see. He is an opportunity. You look at him, it's kind of come in, do what I want to do. This guy's not really going to resist too much, doesn't really even know what I'm doing. I mean, you do see how the company flourished with Richard,
Right. Ooh, excuse me.
The way they were able to, the way they were able to sponsorships, but you also saw the language change. I remember, and Richard's changed. When he first came in, and he would talk about, it was like a banker. He would talk about, the consumer this and the consumer that. We want to get the best product for the consumer. And he now uses a different phrase in place of consumer. And he now says boxing fan, which is, probably what he should have said in the first place. But it kind of shows you how he thinks about people, how he thinks about you. He doesn't care that, if he's giving you crap. That undercard this weekend wasn't that great. In fact, it was kind of crappy, to be honest. Showcase fights, and even a showcase fight where a guy couldn't even showcase himself in the Leo Santa Cruz fight with Christian Maharas. That was a boring fight. I'm more and more convinced that my gut feeling is right, and this kid's being sold to us, and not necessarily he's not necessarily something that's going to develop into anything more than a Margarito. And I don't even know if he's going to get to that level, to be honest.
Right.
But that's what Richard does, and seeing all the corporate sponsorships and all that, they know how to make money, and they've built the brand, and they've known how to what they've done with Showtime. But then that's the thing, is that when Floyd went over to Showtime and Goldenboy started going over to Showtime, whose idea was that? Was that Al Haymon's idea? Was that Richard Schaefer's? Because it's not necessarily good business to just kind of screw over HBO the way they wanted to. What it was the arrogance of, I don't need you, and you're going to take me back anyways. So it's very interesting. And I think the biggest question, one of the biggest questions here, is who has the rights to Canelo? I know he's not an Al Haymon guy, but is he officially with Goldenboy? How long is he with Goldenboy? And is he happy with Goldenboy, or does he want to be next to Oscar, or does it matter to him? Now that they've graduated into pay-per-view, does it matter to him? That's going to be an interesting question, because that, Floyd is great and everything, but he's 37. And this kid is, 23? That's
23 years old.
Future. Yeah. That's another 10 years at least of this franchise that's already quite big and already on pay-per-view. So I think there's a lot of things that are going to come out of this, but a lot of interesting questions are on the table.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely, I would have to really assume that if this Civil War feud that's happening within the company goes in full motion, that the track record that Goldenboy's been putting on in terms of boxing cards is going to slow down a bit in the mid 2014, because the fact that, yeah, my phone is blowing up. It's going nuts right now. That's why I keep stopping. Sorry. Because it's just going to divide the house. Fighters are going to, fighters and managers, even lawyers that are going to get involved, they're going to have their favorite, and their loyalty is going to be questioned. And that's what we're going to find out, how strong of a company Goldenboy really is, because they haven't established themselves as a top-ranked entity yet. They're still trying to find who they are. They haven't really developed a prospect into a market mule. They have built their name off of old fighters, established champion names to get where they're at. They're still trying to find their niche, their way. And Goldenboy, just like a youngster, shows their impatience to develop fighters by throwing them into the ring a little too early, too soon. So this feud is really going to be an eye-opener, not just for the boxing fans, but for the boxing suits in the business. It's going to really get people to start scratching their heads. And the people that felt they were secured in Goldenboy, well, I expect the end of 2014 applications are going to be sent out to other promotional groups. And this can be the rise of a new promotional group. Here's the thing, is if Richard Schaefer can't get his way and possibly loses the name, and I think that's the value, is that name, that branded name, Goldenboy, is a strong possibility that Schaefer's going to fight for that name. But if he doesn't win it, does he go away from boxing? I don't think so. I think we're going to end up seeing a Schaefer promotional group.
That ain't going to fly. Well, that's going to be interesting, though, is that, is it going to be the Schaefer promotional group? This is the other big question. Who's with Haymon?
The Haymon?
Who isn't? Yeah, who's with, because he can't be the Haymon boxing organization, because he's a manager. So that would be illegal if he became a promoter. I think a lot of that stuff's going to kind of come out, too, in that what is really going on over there? Who's actually running things? It's one thing to let somebody use your promotional license. Say, well, there's an Al Haymon fighter. It's not really promoted by Goldenboy, but, we're going to be doing the promotion. That's been going on for quite a while. It's been going on with Luda Bella when he was, as I understood it, when Jermaine Taylor was over there in Berto. I don't think they had paper. I think he was just kind of a flat fee deal, from what I understand. Correct me if I'm wrong. Don't take me to court. But it sounded like there's a lot of guys that are with Haymon that aren't actually with a promoter. Particularly, there's a lot with Goldenboy, and that Schaefer seemed fine with all that. But we're going to find out if these guys are actually signed with Al, or are they with both, or is there a certain group that is kind of with one but not the other?
Right.
That's going to be interesting, because what is that stable really like? What is Goldenboy's stable actually? Is Adrian Broner with Haymon, or is he with Goldenboy? As I heard, he was initially with Goldenboy. I don't know if he is anymore. So
I wonder too.
And would boxing give a shit about Schaefer as a promoter if he didn't have Oscar behind him?
I think that's the big question. Will boxing give a shit? Where's Steven Espinoza? Where does he fit in this circle feud? Where his loyalty is going to be questioned as well. I mean, is he going to side with Schaefer if Schaefer continues on? Is he going to is the relationship with HBO and Goldenboy, is it going to heal up enough because they had great success with Oscar himself? And who really caused the feud between HBO and Goldenboy? Was it really Oscar or was it Schaefer? And Schaefer, getting in bed with Showtime at that time. I mean, this thing is going to put so much light that there's no way these guys are going to hide in what they've been doing.
Well, that's what's really interesting too, because you make a good point in that you look back at everything, and the way the media anymore, it's hard to tell who's fanboy, who's real. But the way most people react when Oscar speaks, they kind of treat him like he's a dumb bimbo, like a himbo.
Right.
Like, oh, Oscar's trying to make nice with Bob Arum. What the hell is that? Oh, he's BSing. And then you look at Schaefer's reactions, and the way he talks about Bob is pretty sinister. Calling him an old man, calling him crazy, like calling him all kinds of stuff. But then you look at Oscar, and it's not always, there was times when there would be animosity, but it seems like he's tried to, here and there on Twitter at least, kind of fix that rift. And you wonder, is that Oscar going, I don't really want to have everybody in the industry hate me. I kind of want to work with other people. I see the limitations of this. And Richard thinks he's going to take over the whole sport with Al, and everybody's going to bow down eventually, and we're going to kill Top Rank, and that company's going to go away, which, they seem to be doing a pretty good job of that. But with this rift, and this is out of left field, Oscar kind of being unhappy. So I don't know. Is there some sort of monetary settlement? I mean, he does run the company. He has a lot of his money tied up in it. I'm very curious to see how this all works. Is Richard Schaefer fireable, both legally is he essential to the process? You know what I mean?
Is he fireable where he's going to get a big sum of money, but also does he get residuals from continuing on in the Goldenboy career? I mean, is that a way of getting him out? Could Oscar's lawyers come up with that idea of saying, you know what, rather than just breaking it all down, have Richard Schaefer still in the mix, but he gets paid, pay him to be out of the company. There's so many things that could happen, but see, it goes back in control. I don't think Richard Schaefer would fall for something like that. I think that he's too stubborn for his own good, where he'd be like, no, I'm not going to be on the back burner. I'm not going to be in the shadows. I want to be the front man. I want to be the guy that's having the conversation in press conferences. I want to be the guy that's there with negotiations. I want to be the guy that's sitting down with the networks, and I want to be the guy that's being pointed at saying this is the guy that's making the great fights. That's what's going to be interesting, is how much Oscar and his team and lawyers are, how much pressure and how much could they sway him. They always say there's always a number for somebody out there to grab onto, right? So what's Schaefer's number? Or what is Oscar's number? Let's not forget, Oscar still's got an addiction. You just don't shake that off right away. He's still fighting some real demons out there in his life.
And it takes about a year to really wake up. It does. From that sort of thing. The first month you get kind of clear, but it takes a full year to really be clean and sober and really see your life. And all of a sudden debt, all those kind of things get put into place, and really into perspective, and you start to take care of them. All the little things, your family, you start to reconnect to your world. That's what drugs kind of do to you, is disconnect you in a sense. You think you're getting high, you're getting away, you're escaping, but really you're disconnecting from everybody around you. And that's what this process is about, of getting sober, is reconnecting to the world, reconnecting to yourself. I think this is the biggest story of the year. It will continue to be. I think, as it rolls forward. Because I don't think it's going away anytime soon. This isn't just rumor. I think this is actually happening.
I think so, too. I mean, it's just too much. There's just been too much out there. So I think we need to point out, this is not something that just happened overnight. We've been hearing about something of this effect happening for quite some, months here. Fight fans, you want to call in, 347-215-7598. In a little short while, we're going to have Steve Kim to weigh in this conversation and bring in his input or any type of new information. Goldenboy Civil War feud here. Let's pass in some fight fans here on Leaving the Ring, and then we'll roll in and talk about this past bringing in Steve Kim here on Leaving the Ring. Don't forget, Mondays, the next round. Tuesdays, Boxeo Tijuana Radio. Tune in to all three shows, and always Thursday mornings at 11 a.m. here on Leave the Ring. Dave Duenas and Gabriel Montoya. Let's bring on Steve Kim. We're back. We can weigh in on the Civil War with Oscar De La Hoya and Richard Schaefer. Steve, what's up, brother? How you doing?
Guys, I'm doing okay. I'm a little delirious because I just got out of Bikram yoga, a 90-minute session. So whatever I say cannot be held against me because you don't know what might come out of this big mouth of mine. I don't lie.
Well,
let's in a little bit about the Civil War. Let me ask you my question about, and that I'm kind of throwing out there. I threw this out there a little earlier. Is this Oscar really waking up the way he did in his earlier career, going into the Trinidad fight, where he finally realized that he had real money and everybody was holding his money back, and he decided to take a stance, take control of his career? Or is this the addiction Oscar De La Hoya that maybe Goldenboy is shelling him up because they don't want him to blow his money on drugs and alcoholism? Which one could this really be?
You know what I think it is? Somewhere along the way, Oscar's relationship with Richard Schaefer and vice versa started to fray. That's my understanding. Oscar, let's not totally paint him here as a sympathetic figure. He has not really acted as a responsible adult, and I've called him an absentee owner. I mean, listen, every time I call Goldenboy for anything, I've never once asked for Oscar. And, for better or worse, Richard Schaefer has taken the reins of that company, and I've said for a while, Oscar is the logo of the company. The leader of it is Richard Schaefer. And I think what's going on is that Oscar and the investors are wondering about the direction of the company, the finances, and at the crux of it is how pervasive is the influence of Al Haymon. I mean, a lot of the fighters that we think are with Goldenboy are only with Al Haymon. And so when you work off of that business model and the way Al Haymon works, he doesn't leave that much profit margin for the promoters that he's worked for in the past or actually ordered around, whether it's Gary Shaw, Lou DiBella, Dan Goosen, or anyone else. So I think that there is a philosophical and personality clash between the two, centering around the business. Now, guys, I'm sure you guys noticed this, but at the fight ringside on Saturday night, De La Hoya basically only showed up for the main event, made a late appearance, and I thought this was very telling. Oscar and Richard did not sit next to each other. They were separated by Leonard Ellerby, but they might as well have been 5 miles apart because I've been told by other people that when they're in the presence of each other, they acted like they weren't even in the same room. So there's certainly something going on, and people are talking about it in the industry.
So the lowering up between these two guys, that's the talk of what everybody's been talking about. Is this a fight for the name of the company and the fighters? And if so, how much rights do you think that Schaefer has into that brand name?
Well, I know this. I don't think he's a shareholder. I think he's a very well-paid employee with a contract. I know that the major shareholders that I know of are obviously Oscar. There's a Mexican investor out of Mexico. His name is Gabriel Brenner, I believe is his name. And then there's also the AEG Corporation, which owns the Staples Center and the LA Kings, and it's a whole conglomerate. They are fighting for the company, I believe. I believe this is not something that's about any type of logo or anything symbolic. I think they are actually fighting for the control of the business or the direction of it. And obviously, I'm sure you guys have heard the conspiracy theories that Richard and Al Haymon are going to start their own company, or they're going to run our Mayweather promotion. And there's a lot of different scenarios that are being thrown around, but there's no doubt about it. Oscar wants more control of his company one way or the other, in my opinion.
Who's been doing the most negotiations? I'm sorry, I just want to ask this one question real quick. Steve, who's been doing most of the contract negotiations between networks and fighters? Is it Richard Schaefer?
It's all Schaefer. It's all Schaefer. Yeah, I mean, listen, does Schaefer go to other lawyers and have counsel? Yes, but when he is dealing with whether it was Ross Greenberg, whether it was Ken Hirschman or Steven Espinoza, I don't know of anything. I mean, listen, Oscar plays a role. There's a certain image, there's a certain brand name recognizability as it relates to Oscar De La Hoya, but listen, he's not a lawyer. I mean, you're talking about a guy who's not real savvy in business. Obviously, Schaefer, with his background in Swiss banking, he was brought in for that reason. But Oscar's not the one negotiating deals or making fights. I mean, they have a staff for that. And, listen, where I fault Oscar is that he had a lot of time. Let's say the last 5 years since his last fight when he fought Manny Pacquiao in December of 2008. Guys, he had a lot of time to at least learn the basic rudimentary elements of the business. And quite frankly, I don't think he did that. I mean, but the question is, and this has been told to me a lot, regardless of how embarrassing Oscar may have been with certain things, whether he became a corporate liability, whoever is running that company, whoever is the CEO, has a fiduciary responsibility to run that company in the best interest of Oscar De La Hoya and the shareholders. And I think that is the crux. That's one of the main issues that I think that we have to look at. That's one of the biggest questions about this whole conflict.
Who do you think survives? Let's say Schaefer's out, Haymon is out, and Oscar gets what he wants, which is his company back. Does he survive, or does he become like Sugar Ray Leonard and all the other promoter fighters, Ricky Hatton, who's, a big name with no infrastructure and really no one to help him? Or can he replace Schaefer and kind of plow forward?
First of all, if this happens, let's say worst case scenario, I think we got to see the division of assets. And in this case, Gabriel, the division of assets is the fighters. I mean, you're in the fight game, you better have some weapons.
Right.
Floyd Mayweather is obviously on the other side. The Haymon fighters, and especially the newer Olympians and his newer signings, they're not going to be with Goldenboy, obviously. But they still have Canelo Alvarez, who is a very valuable piece. And I'm hearing that the pay-per-view this weekend did north of 300,000 buys, which is a very, very good number for that show, okay? So then you got to figure out what happened to the fighters that are both with Goldenboy and Haymon, like Lucas Matisse, Marcos Maidana, Adrian Broner. So I believe that Oscar still has an infrastructure because I think some of the employees that we all know of, they're very loyal to Oscar. They were childhood friends.
Sure.
And I don't think they could leave them. You know who they are, Gabriel. So
right.
And still, Oscar still has a lot of money, I'm assuming. To the Schaefer's credit, I think he's made a lot of investments that have been good for him. So I still think that Oscar's company, for the time being, is still very viable because when you still have a guy like Canelo Alvarez and you still have certain fighters that are at the championship level, and I think that he might actually create some sort of alliance where he gets back in the good graces or at least a working relationship with Top Rank and Bob Arum, which would then get him back on HBO. I don't think it means that it closes down the company. I think what it does is it changes the alliances. So instead of a Cold War now, we have basically a nuclear war.
Yeah, I was wondering.
It's interesting.
I was saying this earlier. I was saying, you would have to think Schaefer was the one that made the negotiations with Showtime and Steven Espinoza. Where does it leave Steven Espinoza in this whole killing field that's happening here? And does it repair, if they do separate in this one entity into two, does it repair the relationship with Oscar and Top Rank and HBO?
Well, Dave, in my personal opinion, just kind of reading the tea leaves, I think that Showtime is a little bit more inclined. If they were to having to choose just one side, I think it'd be Mayweather. I mean, they are in the Mayweather business. That is their franchise. That's their hammer. However, Canelo Alvarez, you can make an argument when Mayweather and Pacquiao fade away into the sunset, which isn't all that far away. Who's the next guy? Well, I think Canelo certainly has the inside track, and he's with Goldenboy. And a lot of these fighters are still with Goldenboy. Now, I don't know exactly how that's going to work out with the contracts and all those other issues, but I do think it's interesting because if you look at the last year, year and a half, and you really look at the fighters, not from a promotional standpoint, but from who actually, quote-unquote, advises them or manages them, I would be willing to bet at least 75% of the slots, both the champion and the opponent, A and B side, have been with Al Haymon. So, yeah, they're gonna. This is interesting how this is going to play out.
Do you think this is going to slow down 2014 if this explodes in terms of TV dates and fighters getting on Showtime or on any network right now? Because it just kind of changes the whole contract obligations that Goldenboy did originally. You think it slows the process of fights being developed here, Steve?
You know, that I don't know. That's probably a question you should ask one of the executives. You know, to me, does it complicate the issue? Yeah, because this is like, let's say these guys get divorced, right? Because right now this is a marriage where they're at least sleeping in separate beds, if not if it's a trial separation. Right. So all the fighters right now are like the kids, and we don't know who gets custody of them. So, you know, and at that point, we don't know who gets weekend visiting rights for any of that. I think we're going to let this develop. I think it's going to be very interesting because...
Who gets Robert Guerrero?
Yeah, Robert Guerrero is trying to get an emancipation from everybody, I guess. You know, here's what I think is going to happen. I think this is going to happen pretty soon. I can't imagine this lasting a lot. I mean, they got another issue here in terms of May 3rd. They have a show that's relatively soon, and I've been told that Mayweather Promotions still does not have a promoter's license in the state of Nevada. So there you go there. And I just found it interesting that at the Mayweather press conference on Saturday.
Steve,
what was that?
He may not have his promoter license, but he sure got his jewelry back, I heard.
Well, you know, listen, it's time for him to get a safety deposit box. There's no doubt about that, regardless.
Right.
But May 3rd is upon us relatively soon. And let's just be honest, the de facto promoter of Mayweather's last 8 fights since he fought De La Hoya has been Goldenboy, no matter what he says. And, you know, I've been told that Mayweather has a contempt, an absolute contempt for Oscar De La Hoya. Just does not respect him for whatever reason, okay? Doesn't want him involved. Right. And I just found it interesting that I was told leading into this promotion that De La Hoya was not going to be there in Las Vegas. And then he made a late-night decision a day or two before the fight that he was going to show up. And then he wasn't present before the fight, wasn't in the media center, but he just basically showed up for the main event, and then right after the fight left. So this is I think, a very fascinating story because, you know, just look, Oscar is a terrible poker player, doesn't know how to be vague about things, doesn't know how to necessarily be subtle. If you go to his Twitter account, his avatar recently changed within the last week or two to the Goldenboy logo.
Yeah.
Okay? Also, a couple of weeks ago, when HBO, who last year he was giving out retweets like government cheese for anyone that claimed to have unsubscribed to HBO, he's praising Vera Chavez as being Ali Frazier or something. I mean, he's saying, what great fights from HBO Boxing. Mind you, HBO Boxing last year jettisoned Goldenboy off their airwaves publicly. They made an edict out of it. I don't want to put too much into all that, but what does that tell you guys?
Yeah, I mean, he's kind of got his hat in his hand. But, you know, at the same time, I mean, He's going through the 12 steps. He's kind of reassessing everything. Right? That's what it looks like. And if you really look at the last year, particularly Schaefer's behavior in the media, the way he talks about Bob Arum, the way he talks about certain media members, he's become something of a kind of a crazy dictator. He's got some pretty nutty quotes that are out there. And I think at some point Oscar's looking like, this. I used to talk about cleaning up the sport, not masterminding and dictating over the whole thing. I think things have gotten out of hand. And I don't know necessarily agree if it's going to be a nuclear war. I think if the dust settles, we end up with a Goldenboy that's able to work with Top Rank, that has some decent assets, and then this other league that is Al Haymon's company. Who knows where Richard Schaefer is? If he's gone, that'd be great. But I mean, he could run that company. Then it becomes a multiverse as opposed to kind of the two worlds that we're living in now, DC and Marvel. I think it's good for the sport in a sense, don't you think?
I think that's very plausible. I want to see what happens in the next 2 weeks. I want to see, number one, is there going to be a real division? Are there going to be lawsuits in terms of accountability, the relationship to fiduciary duties? I think this story is just unfolding. Guys, honestly, I first heard about this, I would say about 2 months ago, and I didn't pay any mind to it. I just thought it seemed so illogical in a lot of ways, or inconceivable. But other people have told me that this fraying of this relationship, whether it's professional, personal, or both, have been lingering for quite a while. I was told that by a very good source that with Oscar's latest stint in rehab last fall, that was kind of like the last straw, that Schaefer just says, wait a minute, what's going on here? Can we even trust this guy to do whatever responsibilities he has? So, it is interesting, Gabe. You make a point as it relates to the Cold War. Listen, I don't think there's any doubt a couple of years ago that the guy really pushing it was really pushing back on any type of cooperation, reaching across the table, was Bob Arum. I don't disagree with that at all. But in the last year, I don't think there was any doubt it was Richard Schaefer digging in his heels, making it clear that we're not going to work with anybody else. So I think there is a subtle shift there. And, I believe Oscar's reached out to a lot of old friends for some advice. Let's just put it that way.
Well,
interesting.
It's ready at the end of our show here. Steve, thanks again, bro, for calling in and talking to us here on Leaving the Ring. Again, every Monday night, don't forget the next round with Steve Kim and Gabriel Montoya. Every Tuesday, you got Boxeo Tijuana Radio, and every Thursday at 11 a.m., you got Leaving the Ring. Thanks again, guys.